On today's show, there's been a lot of reporting that the core four could stay intact. Yesterday I told you why that's a good idea. Today I'll tell you why it's a bad idea.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Be sure to give us a 5-star review there. Subscribe to the show. You can also find the show on YouTube. If you're watching this video right now, do me a favor, give us a thumbs up, hit that like button. Also, be sure to subscribe to the Locked On Cavs channel. You can get it for free on YouTube as well as everywhere you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. New customers visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNBA and you can add big to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So lately, there's been a lot of reporting that there could be a certain scenario in which the Cavs keep together the core four. Some people have suggested that might be the most likely outcome of this summer for the Cavaliers. Of course, as a reminder, the core four: Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, and Donovan Mitchell. Those four guys, 3 of the 4 already have been All-Stars. The 4th is Evan Mobley, who I think, and certainly a lot of people think has perennial All-Star potential, has been a Defensive Player of the Year finalist in his second season. So that is something that could happen. On yesterday's edition of Locked On Cavs, I told you why that would be a good idea for the Cavs. Well, today, I'm going to tell you why that would be a bad idea. Again, I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cavs at places like Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, or even once upon a time at ESPN Cleveland as well. So I went through the reasons yesterday why it would be a good idea to keep all those guys together, right? First of all, 4 really good basketball players. All 3 of them have been All-Stars. The 4th, I think Evan Mobley has All-Star teams in his future, so why wouldn't you want to keep those guys together? It makes sense to have good players. Also, this team hasn't had a ton of time in the playoffs. Continuity certainly can be a good thing. There's no doubt about that. There are very valid and real reasons to keep these 4 guys together. Absolutely there are. But I think that there are reasons to break them up too. I do. And if I'm being truthful, the side I lean on, if I were Kobe Altman and making this decision this offseason for the Cavs, the side I lean on probably is the one I'm going to talk about today. And that is why it makes sense for the Cavs to break up this group. And the first thing that pops into my mind when I think about breaking up the core four, the quote-unquote core four for the Cavs, the very first thing I think of is this roster is not optimized as well as it could be. When you take a look at some of the best teams in the NBA and how they're built, it's not an impossible thing to build a great team the way that the Cavs have. I think the Cavs have been relatively successful over the last 2 years, even if they haven't gotten to the point in the playoffs where I think they should have been. They've won a lot of basketball games. No one can argue that. But there aren't a lot of great teams that are built the way the Cavs are built right now, where you've got 2 all-star caliber guards, 2 all-star caliber big men, and I think that's the place to focus here is the 2 all-star caliber big men, and role players on the wing. And not every great player, or not every great team, I should say, has great players on the wings. Most do. I mean, Boston is a great example of this, where they've got 2 all-NBA caliber wing players. I think that's probably the easiest path to success roster building, but those guys are really difficult to find. That's why they're so expensive when contracts are talked about. That's why they're so expensive when one of them is available via trade, because those guys are difficult to find. And I'm not saying that one of those guys is even available for the Cavs this offseason. Might not be. But it's difficult, I think, for teams to build a true contender, where I don't think the Cavs have really been a true championship contender over the last couple of years, and I think a lot of people would agree with that, where they've been a very good team, but they haven't been a team that I've looked at and been like, man, I really think they can win the NBA Finals this year. They need to get to that point for this era to be considered a success. Even if they don't win a title, at some point they need to be considered a team that, hey, if the Cavs win the title this year, it wouldn't come as some huge shock. That's what the Cavs need to get to. And there are not often teams that have the roster construction that the Cavs do that you can say that about. It's a rare thing. And I think the 2-guard thing is a little bit easier to work around, even if they're both a little undersized. I think that's an easier thing to work around. For me, I think the roster optimization is a really big deal. And I don't think you're getting the most right now. If you're the Cavs, I don't think you're getting the most out of the level of talent on the roster the way it's currently allocated. And as I talk about that, I'm talking about the front court. I'm talking about having 2 guys that are center types, where Evan Mobley's played a lot of power forward. Personally, I think Evan Mobley's future is as a center. You don't see a lot of teams that have 2 awesome big guys. There are teams that have 2 good big guys, where you will have, I take Boston for another example, where Al Horford is still a good basketball player at his age, but he very clearly has been a role player. Where Kristaps Porzingis, I don't think he's quite a star. I think he's probably on that borderline, but he's a very, very good player. But you don't see 2 guys even of that ilk, I don't think, on teams that are like this. Maybe if you want to make the case in Denver, I think Aaron Gordon is a role player, and I think he's much more of a power forward than a center, especially, because you just never want to take Nikola Jokic off the floor. So it's really, you don't see a ton of teams that are built like this. Maybe you can point to Milwaukee with Brook Lopez and Giannis Antetokounmpo, but the big difference there is Brook Lopez is someone that shoots from the outside, and the Cavs right now have 2 bigs that I think are both awesome. I think Jarrett Allen is a terrific player. I think Evan Mobley is going to be someone that in his career makes an All-NBA team at some point. I think the sky is really the limit for him. But because those guys, neither one of them, and I understand Evan's 3-point percentage this year was right around 37, but he doesn't take enough of them for him to be a factor to opposing defenses from beyond the arc. Because of that, you just have, I think right now, too much redundancy in the front court. That's reason number 1 why I think breaking up the core 4 makes sense. Because right now, I do believe in the NBA, you can be redundant in certain spots. You can have some guys that are very similar in terms of their skill sets and really good also, as other guys who have the same skill set and also the same level, or I guess in the same ballpark level of talent. You can do that. Certainly on the wing, and I think you can do it in the backcourt too. I do think you can do it in the backcourt. But I think it's a much more difficult thing to pull off in the front court. And I'm not sure that the Cavs trying to pull that off, especially after we've seen what has happened to them offensively in the playoffs in the last 2 years. I'm not sure that trying to pull that off is the best thing for this organization, for what this team should strive to accomplish in the postseason. I'm not sure that having 2 guys in the front court that are as good as Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, again, it's not a talent issue. I think it's a fit issue. I'm not sure that having that together on the court is maximizing the amount of talent that the Cavs have. It's not that Jarrett Allen's not good. It's not that Evan Mobley's not good. It's not. It's that I don't think how good this roster could be. Like if you just said, okay, you get so many talent points to build your roster. You have X amount of talent to put on the roster. You want to sprinkle some in the backcourt. You want to sprinkle some in the front court, some on the wing. That's how you want to build a roster. Right now, the Cavs have a lot of sprinkles in the front court with 2 really talented guys. Like I think Jarrett Allen should have been an all-star this past year. That's how good he is. And then a lot of talent in the backcourt with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. There's not enough of that talent sprinkled on the wing. And because of that and the redundancy in the front court, I think that the core four moving forward should probably be a core three. I know it doesn't rhyme, so that's not what you would call it. And I'm not sure that it's quite a big three because I'm not sure they're quite good enough for that label. But I think that's what this should probably turn into. Not because these guys aren't good, but because the talent needs to, I think the talent needs to be allocated just a little bit differently. And if that talent is allocated differently, I think you get more out of Evan Mobley. And I'll tell you about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime brings a lot. You know, there's basketball to bet on. You can bet on the WNBA. I know the NBA Finals, not necessarily the most exciting series that we've ever seen as two teams play for the Larry O'Brien Trophy, certainly. There's also baseball. One of my favorite things to do is go look at FanDuel, see what type of odds can I get on somebody to hit a home run that day, whether it's with the Cleveland Guardians or another team. It's one of my favorite things to do in sports betting with FanDuel. Just check out who's going to hit a home run today. What kind of good odds can I get there? You know, if I like a certain matchup between a hitter and a pitcher, FanDuel is my, no question, place to go for that. And right now, new customers get a $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bets. New customers, $200 in bonus bets with a winning $5 bet. That you can use that on anything. WNBA, baseball, Olympics are coming up. You can use that on anything. If you want to, like I said, bet who's going to hit a home run. You can use that stuff, those bonus bets, because I know you're going to hit on that $5 bet. I got faith you're going to win that. You can use that stuff for anything at FanDuel Sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com. This is how you do it. FanDuel.com/LockedOn, and you will add big winnings to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. LOCKEDON. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So I talk about how the talent reallocation could make the roster just better as a whole because you could be more versatile and do more things, right? But I think that the biggest benefit to breaking up the core four, and I will say I don't think it's a difficult decision. If you are going to trade one of the four, which guy it should be. I think it should be Jarrett Allen because I don't think it's as easy to make two good bigs in the front court work as opposed to two good guards in the back court. I think that's a much easier thing to do. I really do. I believe that if Jarrett Allen were to be traded for pieces that are not a big, Evan Mobley would take that next step that so many people, including myself, are waiting to see on the floor. Because with what you saw from Evan in the playoffs when Jarrett Allen was out with that rib injury that he couldn't play through, that is something that, while it might not be an every night thing, like I don't know that Evan's ever going to be a guy that goes out and just averages 26 points. And I think he affects the game in a lot of different ways, in a lot of positive ways. I don't need to go out and, talk about his defense, how good he is on that end, because everyone knows that. But I think that there are certain things offensively that he doesn't get the opportunity to do because the Cavs offense hasn't been structured in a way that allows for that. And maybe part of that was on coaching with JB Bickerstaff not necessarily being an offensive-minded head coach. That is certainly a very real possibility. You can make that case to me, and I can't necessarily refute it. But I also think part of it is a spacing thing. And I don't care who is coaching, whether it's JB Bickerstaff or, whoever the Cavs are hiring at this point. And maybe as you listen to this, they've made a hire. I don't know. I'm recording this Sunday night, truthfully. So maybe they've made a hire. And that offense looks different. But I'm not sure what can be done spacing-wise to give the Cavs the room to operate they need when they've got two big guys on the floor. So if you put Evan Mobley in more space, here are some things that I think can happen that I think he can be really good at. Number one, I think Evan is a really good playmaker for a guy his size. I actually do think you see this sometimes, even in that lack of space, you see some, I think both Evan and Jarrett do a good job of this, but the big-to-big passing is really good. I think Evan does a good job of finding open teammates for easy baskets at times. When he's allowed to operate sort of as like, an offensive hub, that's certainly a term that gets thrown out. You stick him on the elbow and let him play make a little bit from there. I think the Cavs find success offensively there. The other thing that I really do believe that the Cavs need to do more of with him offensively, I think getting Evan the ball while he's already in motion and able to get downhill is really when you see him at his best. Because, yeah, you can give him touches at the block, and sometimes he's going to score and sometimes he's not. But until he adds more strength and truthfully a little bit of weight, I think it's going to be difficult for him to be a super effective, super efficient player with his back to the basket. I just don't know that post-ups with him at the block are going to be something that's worth it, where I'm just not sure you're going to be getting 1.6 or 1.7 points per possession there. And with all the other talent on the floor, to justify it, you need to be, I think, above 1.5 points per possession to be doing that. But I do think and we've seen this how much too, with particularly when Jarrett's off the floor and the Cavs get a stop defensively, Evan grabs a rebound and takes off down the floor with the basketball. And he looks great in transition with the ball in his hands, and he's able to attack downhill. I think that can be done more in the front court too, when he's the sole big out there and there's more space around him. That is one thing that I don't think is done enough. And I think part of it's because it's hard to find him the space to operate when defenses aren't being pulled from sideline to sideline the way they could be when there are 4 viable shooters on the floor. Right now, the Cavs, for the most part, are playing with 3. And sometimes defenses aren't paying a ton of attention. I know Isaac Okoro had a great season shooting where he was near 40% from deep, but teams still aren't giving him, a ton of respect in the corner. It's not like he's Kyle Korver and they're sticking to him. So it's hard to find that space to do that. And then the third thing is something that I alluded to a little bit with getting stops and pushing the basketball. But I think putting Evan in a situation offensively where if the Cavs are playing with more pace, how many more of those opportunities is he going to get? Where if you want to dive into the advanced stats, and I don't have them pulled up right now in terms of exactly what the Cavs pace has been the last couple of years or where they have ranked in the NBA, but it's near the bottom. And I do think part of that is coaching. I think JB Bickerstaff preferred for his team to play a little bit slower, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But part of it is when there are 2 bigs on the floor, getting up and down and playing in transition and playing fast and doing all those things that I think would make Evan Mobley a better, more viable offensive threat, those become more difficult to do. They become more of a challenge when, yes, defense is the primary focus, and I get it, and it should be, and the Cavs have been built to be a good defensive team. They have been, and they have been a good defensive team. But when that comes first, that's fine. But I think it's come first sometimes at the expense of playing a little bit faster offensively. And I think if you want to crank up the pace, I'm not saying that the Cavs have to turn into the 7 seconds or less Suns. Like, that's silly. That doesn't make sense with their personnel. But there's no reason why they can't be a middle-of-the-pack team next year in terms of pace. If they are that, and they're creating more possessions, and they're creating more opportunities in transition, who does that benefit? I think it benefits Donovan Mitchell, but I think it benefits Evan Mobley more than anybody because it gives him the opportunity to make plays out on the run, on the break, not only for himself, but for others too. And I think that is the thing that that's the lowest hanging fruit to grab with him offensively, where you can make that slight change by just playing a little bit faster. You're going to get more out of him. He's going to be more efficient. He's going to be a bigger threat offensively. He's going to take some of that scoring burden away from the guys in the backcourt if both of them are back. I really do think that's the case with him. I think that's part of the way that you get the most out of Evan Mobley. And with Mobley, and this is the last thing I'll say on him before I move on to my final point here, but I think when Donovan Mitchell was acquired from Utah in September of 2022, what that trade did and what Donovan Mitchell does, who Donovan is a great player. I think he's a superstar. What he has done is he has raised the floor of the Cavaliers to where when Donovan Mitchell's playing basketball and playing well and healthy, the Cavs are going to be good. They are. They're going to be a playoff team, probably going to be a home court team because he's that good. But what I think getting the most out of Evan Mobley does is, you've got your floor here. Getting the most out of Evan Mobley pushes that ceiling up. Because if Donovan Mitchell's the floor raiser, Evan Mobley's the ceiling raiser. And that's the thing that I think needs to be thought about as decisions are made this offseason. Because if you're getting the most out of Evan Mobley, I think there's a pretty good chance you're getting the most out of this roster. Now, with this core four, the Cavs have been to the playoffs twice. Is that enough of a sample size to want to move on? I'll tell you about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships. And we're talking about patience today. Talked about it yesterday too. But the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Cavs, peak performance. eBay Motors, peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts, that's a lot of parts. For your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So the last thing I wanted to talk about as we talk about breaking up the core four. If you're against this, go listen to yesterday's episode where I laid out the case to keep the core four intact. I did. Laid out the case to keep the core four intact because I do think on some levels that makes sense. It's not the direction I would go, but I think on some levels it is something that makes sense. The Cavs have been to the playoffs in each of the last 2 years. In the first year, 2023 playoffs, had the number 4 seed, lost to the New York Knicks in 5 games. It was a disappointment. I don't think anyone would argue that. That regular season, they won 51 games, massive success. Playoffs, failure. Was. This year, regular season wasn't as successful. I don't fault the Cavs for that. I think that there were a lot of injuries that made it so. That happens. Still had home court advantage. Made it out of the first round. 7-game series win over the Orlando Magic. Lost to the Boston Celtics in 5 games. Yeah, Jared Allen didn't play in the Celtics series. Didn't play in the last few games of the Magic series. Donovan Mitchell missed the last couple of games against the Orlando Magic, or against the Boston Celtics, Karis LeVert missed the last game against the Boston Celtics. We can talk about that as it mattering, and maybe the Cavs would have won another game against Boston. I actually think that's probably pretty likely. But if we're being honest with ourselves, I don't think the Cavs are winning that second round series against the Celtics. Even if they have full health, I think it's closer, but I don't think that's a series that they win. And I do believe that the Cavs are at the point where they're good enough to consider themselves a playoff team every year. Unless things go really badly, as long as Donovan Mitchell is here, they should be a playoff team every year. And it's clear Boston is the best team in the Eastern Conference, and it's not really a close race. The Cavs, what they need to be thinking about doing this offseason is they need to be thinking about when they make moves, questioning, one, Does this help us get the best out of Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley? I think those are the two most important guys. 2, does this move, whatever the move is, whether it's signing a bench player or trading someone or whatever, does this move put us closer to beating the Boston Celtics in the playoffs? Those are the questions that should be answered. And I don't think, if you run this back, I don't think if you're the Cavs, you look yourselves in the mirror and say, we are closer to beating the Boston Celtics in the playoffs next year than we were this year by doing the same stuff. And I'm not saying that everything would be the same, because there are always going to be some changes on rosters. Like, there are always going to be role players that move around. But I'm not sure that you can look in the mirror and say, if we keep this core 4 intact, we are closer to beating the Boston Celtics than we were last year. And I think that needs to be a question that is asked this offseason by the Cavs. I do. I think breaking up the core 4 to some extent, I'm not saying that you need to trade 2 of them, but I think trading one of them would probably, depending what you get back, of course, would probably help to answer that second question a little bit. And I think that is something that has to matter as this offseason goes along. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Again, I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from Cleveland Magazine. You might know me from 92.3 The Fan, or one of my other stops throughout my career. Very much appreciate you making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. We'll be doing a mailbag episode this Friday. If you've got questions, drop your comments on this YouTube video, or you can tweet them at RealDCunningham or at Locked On Cavs. I will get to your questions this Friday. Did this a couple weeks ago. Really enjoyed it. Going to do it again. I promise. NBA Draft Talk coming tomorrow. Not sure if I'm going to have a guest or not, or if it's going to be going over some of the prospects I like, but I will be talking NBA Draft. Cavs have the number 20 pick. That will be on tomorrow's Locked On Cavs. So keep it right here at Locked On Cavs. Make us your first listen every day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.